Let's do a deep dive into a meditation technique called Trataka. Today we're going to talk about how to do Trataka properly. We're going to answer a lot of questions about the technique, details about how to implement it. We're going to discuss who is Trataka for, who benefits from it the most, and who should be doing that type of technique. We're also going to be talking about why is Trataka so good, the advantages of Trataka, and also the mechanisms through which those advantages happen. Then we're going to talk about why isn't Trataka more mainstream, and also the history of Trataka and the context where it appears. That part of the discussion is particularly interesting to those of you that are more advanced in meditation, those of you that already know Trataka, and you can maybe be thinking, you know what, I already know it, I know what to do. You might still be interested in that, because when we understand the context where Trataka appears, we can see that perhaps the use of Trataka can enhance other practices as well, and so you might decide to play with it in other moments of your practice. And then finally, when you should stop doing Trataka. So with that said, let's dive in. Okay, so how do you do Trataka? You get an object, which traditionally would be a candle, and then you just stare at it. You just look at it without blinking. That's it. It's very easy to explain and, tends to be very hard to implement. But the idea is just that. You just look at an object and stare unblinkingly. It's basically just the act of seeing, of looking at something without moving your eyes. That's it. That's the technique. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, so let's go over a few that I imagine you might have. The first one is, what am I aiming for here? What's the objective? The objective is immobility. So what you need to aim to do is to be able to stare at that object without blinking, without moving your eyeballs, without moving your eyelids, and then eventually without moving your head, without moving your body. So you want maximum amount of immobility while keeping that object in your vision clear. Your second question then might be, what if my eyes glaze over, right? Because when we're looking at something for a while, then our eyesight sort of like softens, and then you start seeing things kind of blurry, or the object kind of moves around, right? Your objective is to keep that image sharp. So whenever your eyes start to blur the image, then you want to sharpen that image. That's the objective. So again, keeping full immobility while keeping the object sharp. This is what you are aiming to do. All right, so what should you think about while you stare? Should you be, for example, trying to look at the edges of the object, take it all in detail, be more mindful, be more present with it? No, you can do that perhaps, but that is not the point of Trataka, okay? The point of Trataka is indeed, again, immobility and the sharpness of the object you're seeing. It is about seeing, not about how you're perceiving that object. It's not about seeing more of reality. No, that's not what it's about. The point here is to keep the candle in focus. Keep the candle in focus while also keeping your eyes immobile and your eyelids immobile so you're not blinking. That is hard to do. That probably will consume all of your mind, and that is what you're dedicating your time to do. So if the objective was to see the candle well, you would be blinking, because it's substantially easier to keep the focus if you can blink. So we're really making it hard to keep that focus on the candle because you cannot blink. So that is where your effort goes. It's probably not a good idea to be meditating on the nature of the object itself. It's really a vision exercise. Do you need a candle? No. Any high contrast object would work. So the idea here is to get an object that is hopefully simple enough with edges that are sufficiently well defined that you can understand precisely what it means to keep it in focus against a backdrop that is also sufficiently simple. So you can draw a dot on a white piece of paper, or draw something very simple, very dark into a piece of paper, and that will be good enough. I actually stare at the fan in my ceiling. I've done that several times. The fan is black and it looks like a cross when it's not working. And then the ceiling is white. And so just lay down and stare at the fan. Basically, any high contrast object that has very clearly defined edges, hopefully a simple object, and then a simple background that is high contrast with it will work. But traditionally, you would do this with a candle. And there are reasons to do it with a candle, which are not precisely for this video, but there is another technique that comes from Trataka, which is called inner Trataka, for which having done Trataka with a candle could be very useful. So there are reasons to do it with a candle. It's nice, it's picturesque, it's meditative. The candle does move a little bit, which gives a little bit of an extra component there that helps you with your distraction. So a candle is great if you can do it. But don't stop yourself from doing it because you don't have a candle, because honestly, you can just get a piece of paper and draw the object and you'll be fine. Or you could stare at a pencil, or you could stare at whatever's in front of you, as long as it is high contrast. Another thing that traditionally is used is sacred geometry. So yantras, which are images that correspond to gods. So that kind of thing would also be used. That's something that we can discuss in another video. What kinds of objects would have some spiritual importance that could be used for Trataka if the objective here is spiritual evolution or some things like that. But it is not necessary. The majority of benefits of Trataka, or at least a serious amount of benefit, will come from just performing the practice. It truly doesn't matter what object you use. How far should the object be? Well, if it is a candle, then you're thinking from arm's length to maybe a yard from you. But again, it depends on the size of the object relative to the background. So you want to keep it very sharp, you want to keep it clear. So if you have a piece of paper and you drew a dot on it, I'm imagining the distance of your face to a desk would be appropriate. If you're talking about a fan, a big thing on a ceiling, then hey, the distance to the ceiling. So it's not that important, but it is important within a certain range. So you don't want to do Trataka with something that is far in the horizon, something that is in the landscape really far. Imagine a candle in front of you. Imagine the size of that thing, and imagine that it is about a yard from you. You want sort of those proportions. You want the object to be somewhat small, but very clear against a big background that is somewhat boring. So when you go into more advanced parts of the practice, you want your background to be as simple as possible, which will make the information coming from the background disappear faster. So I imagine that just staring at a nice, beautiful garden, lots of flowers, lots of things, and then just focusing on a chair may not be a good idea. Staring at a wall that has some stain would be probably a good idea. So you want sort of boring background and a sufficiently well-visible object to be the center of your attention. How high should the object be? Well, Trataka is harder the more you have to deal with your eyes being open and without being able to blink. That's actually not true. This actually gets easier very fast, but that's going to be your biggest impediment at first, at least for a week, is going to be something that could be so much suffering that could make it prohibitive. So the idea here is that the higher the object, the harder it is. The standard way to do Trataka is with an object exactly at eye height. If you put it lower, then you are closing your eyes, and so that's going to make it much, much easier. Going higher is an excellent training ability for other types of practices. So even higher than eyesight is going to be harder and is going to be useful as a progression. Going lower, it's basically cheating. You are going to be closing your eyes quite a bit, so you're going to have substantially less of the problem of blinking, which is an advantage and a disadvantage. So you can use having the candle lower as a means of progression. So if you're finding it too unbearable to try it at eye height, then you might think, you know what, let me try this thing, master that first, and then progress. Yay for you, definitely you can do it. But I'm alerting you that there is a disadvantage here, which is a great thing of Trataka is that you will not contend with thought. So the beauty of Trataka is it allows you to train focus and train several meditative abilities without worrying about having your thoughts constantly badgering you. If you have the object really low and then you're not having that difficulty of dealing with your eyes, you kind of destroy a piece of Trataka's advantage. So I suggest that if you can, you should start with the object already at eye height and then see how that goes, because I think that's probably the fastest way to see the benefits of Trataka and kind of get it. If you go low, this is going to be very much like your normal meditation, which is kind of what we don't want to see. I think that the biggest advantages of Trataka are going to become very visible when you up that difficulty to the standard level. That's my recommendation. If you find it unbearable, you really can't withstand, it's too much, then yes, go the adaptation way, put that candle or the object a little lower, and then live to fight another day. All right, what should be your position? Typical meditation position is good. So of course, crisscross applesauce, Padmasana, half Padmasana, all these classic meditation positions are there for a reason. You want to keep your spine straight. That's a classic requirement for meditation positions. There are reasons for it. The first reason being quite mechanical, that once you start meditating for a little bit longer, you're going to notice spine issues immediately. So you're going to start having pains that are going to hinder your ability to go into longer stays. So learning to keep your spine straight is really very important for that. There are also spiritual reasons. So when you are meditating, you're activating certain types of energy, certain types of things that are highly conducive to rise and to really happen if you have your spine straight. So you really want to do it. I think it's actually rather important. But of course, there are modifications in which you can keep your spine straight without being in a classic meditation position. So you can, of course, sit straight. You probably know that one. You can also lay down. Again, if you want to meditate laying down, it's a good idea to meditate as soon as you wake up so that you don't fall asleep. The progress might not be as fast as you would like when you are sitting down, but you can. I certainly have done tons of Trataka, literally laying down on the floor and staring at a ceiling, and that was fun. It worked well. So you can do that. You can also do Trataka with a bad spine, just like completely turned over, because at first we're doing Trataka for not that long. So honestly, for starting, if you want to just sit wrong and just try it out, do it. We aim for the best that we can, and then we aim to perfect things as we go. I don't think Trataka is something that needs you to have that straight spine immediately. You have benefits already, even with a terrible position. What do you do if your eyes start crying, if you start feeling a burning in your eyes and you have tears coming down? You bear it. That's basically what you do. The objective here is immobility no matter what. So that means that if you feel the burn in your eyes, that's awesome. Then you just try to bear it. Try to bear it while keeping your eyes open. And then if the tears run down your cheeks, then they run down your cheeks. That's what you do. It's very simple and very unnerving, not necessarily easy to do at first. The good news is that you'll be shocked how fast you get better at it. The beautiful thing of Trataka is that your first day, this seems impossible. How would anybody do that? In 5 days, you will see incredible advances in your ability to withstand those sensations and for your eyes to stop bothering you. It's actually really possible and not all that hard to be able to stare for indefinite amounts of time. And I don't think it takes that long, that much training as with some other techniques. That part is not the hard part. So what you do is that you're trying to, at first, keep your eyes open. Just keep your eyes open. Just keep your eyes open. And if you have to keep your eyes like this and oh my God, it's fine. Just go that way. Then as you master that, you get a little calmer. You get a little less freaked out. You realize that, this is fine. It's not going to be terrible. Then you work on keeping your position, keeping your poise, and just staring with a steady eyeball and eyelid position. That you're not doing this, you're just normal. Then you work on relaxing your eyes, just being comfortable in that position. Then you work on immobility of the face, just not moving anything at all. Then you work on keeping your body as immobile as possible. You're always going to have the movement of breathing, but you try to keep everything else still and relaxed. So you're really working to master the ease. That's what you're going for. How long should you stare? You should stare for a minute. And then when you master a minute, meaning when you can relax your eyes for a minute, you can go to 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 5. When you get to 5, then you work on the body, you work on all the rest. And when you are like, okay, I can be 5 minutes at peace here with this position and with my eyes that way, then you have choices. Because once you reach 5 minutes of Trataka, there are several things that can be done. So your aim is 5 minutes, and then let's talk later about what you do afterwards. Next topic, who is Trataka for? Well, Trataka is in principle for everybody. So anybody that can see and keep an object in focus with their vision can do Trataka. So anybody can do Trataka and can have the advantages of Trataka. But Trataka is spectacular for some kind of people that are generally not doing all right with your standard meditation. Here's the thing. Most meditation, as is taught in the West, the kinds of more traditional meditations that you're normally taught, they have to do with paying attention to something boring. So you're basically doing things like paying attention to your breathing or paying attention to your body and doing kind of body scans and things like that. The issue is that some of us are very prone to having a lot of thoughts. When I started meditating, the amount of thoughts I would have was just insane. It was just too much. It wouldn't stop. It wouldn't stop. It was just a complete barrage of thoughts. Some people are very overwhelmed. When they stop, their mind just, will race. People with ADHD, these type of people will have a lot of difficulty. And then normally when you complain and you say, hey, I hate meditating because it's so challenging, it's just constant barrage of thought, what do they tell you? They tell you that every time you identify a thought and then you bring yourself back to the breathing, then you have done a curl or like a push-up for your brain, right? That's what they say. The idea being that, hey, it's great to have so many thoughts because then you get to practice a lot during meditation. So your meditation is very active. You're constantly doing those push-ups. So by the end of this, you're going to be full of muscle, whereas somebody that has no thoughts at all has done nothing. They just chilled. Yes, except that you can be so distracted that is the same as if you had done no push-ups at all. I would start meditating and then within a minute I would be lost in a thought and then I would have no idea that I was lost in a thought and my alarm would sound 20 minutes later and I'll be like, I have not realized and came back to my breath once. Like not even once in a 20-minute stretch did I realize that there was a thought and I came back. That is very frustrating. I mean, that is the equivalent to you get dressed to go to the gym, you drive your car, you park your car, you get into the gym, you get everything ready, then you get to the gym and then you just talk to the receptionist the entire time you're there. That's not the same as exercising. Like you have done exactly no push-ups, you have gained nothing. And for these people, it's very frustrating. It does not feel at all like I exercised. It feels like a nightmare. I just wasted my time. It's very frustrating, very also sort of distressing to just wake up, from a reverie, some form of dream or something. What was I doing all this time? It's actually not great, and it just makes you give up on meditation. And when you complain about it and you express how frustrating it is, they just tell you, just keep at it, and it's going to be better. Just keep at it. I have two things to say about that. The first thing is that they are right, okay? If you do keep at it, you will eventually realize that there is a thought there. You will get better. The problem is that you don't know when. It might take too long. It is a frustrating thing and you just might give up before. So yes, it will work. They're not wrong. I don't know that you have to do things that way. And so the second thing I would say is that you don't have to suffer through that. There are other techniques that will train your focus, that will train other abilities, that will scaffold your entire brain so that by the time you come back to a breathing meditation, you may just be able to do it at a reasonable level. Instead of having to start from like advanced practice in some sense, you can go and do Trataka and then get trained. And it's very funny because to a certain level, Trataka is actually considered an advanced technique, whereas paying attention to the breath is kind of like a beginner technique. But I think it's all about the footprint of your brain and how you work and how you think, how you operate. I think that a lot of people, especially a lot of neurodivergent people, are going to find Trataka substantially more doable than a standard breathing meditation that is great for neurotypicals, that a neurotypical person will come and say, oh, I feel so much more peaceful. I feel great. I do meditation and I feel wonderful. It's such a peaceful moment for me. And you're like, I'm in hell when I'm doing standard meditation. People with trauma, you're going to do a standard meditation and trauma resurfaces during it is a nightmare. Many neurodiverse people, many people with trauma, people with, things that resurface when they try your standard open awareness, the meditations that are very boring in nature, they're going to have a lot of difficulty and they're going to find Trataka actually easier and more fun. Even though mostly, standardly, you would think of Trataka as a more advanced technique, which is kind of funny. Trataka will overwhelm your system with sensation. It will be so huge that your thoughts just run away. So Trataka will chase your thoughts away with a broom. It's like, get out of here. And so it will solve the problem for you immediately. You will learn to focus without having to contend with the thought. And the beauty is, and I can tell you personally, I've seen that happen to me as someone who did not do well with their standard meditation, that once I had done a lot of other techniques that are actually supposedly substantially more advanced, I could come back to the breathing meditation, paying attention to the breath, and just find it amazing. And, these days I do a lot of paying attention to the breath and just your standard body scans and meditations that are very open awareness style. And I do a lot of those, and I find them to be actually quite peaceful and quite wonderful. So my path was inverted that way, and I could take on those advanced techniques a lot sooner. So, hey, that might be your case as well. Another type of person that might enjoy Trataka a lot is people who think that meditation is very boring. How do you deal with just boredom? So on the one hand, the answer is you should try to bear it, because being able to withstand boredom is the practice of meditation. So there is something to it. But again, it can be too much. Sometimes it is really a lot, especially if you have some dopamine addiction going on there. This is really hard to withstand that type of boredom. People with ADHD, again, find it very, very hard to withstand boredom. How do we get past boredom, generally speaking? How do people take on hard things and manage to stay on it? Normally, it's because of progress. If you can have progress in something, you can withstand a lot of hardship because you're seeing it go somewhere. You're seeing that the skills are mounting, right? And so what's very hard of standard meditation is that the skills mount in a very quiet way. Your brain is rewiring itself, but it's very difficult to see. Usually, the thing people say is like, wow, I seem to be calmer, or I seem to react slower. There's all these diffuse sort of benefits that kind of appear. You don't know exactly when, you don't know what. You know that your life is better, but you can't pinpoint where did you get that. You know that you're doing this practice and it somehow is helping. Not with Trataka, because you can actually progress in Trataka itself in a very visible manner. So you can be like, I cannot stand a minute, now I can stand 2, now I can stand 3, now I can stand 5. I used to have to force my eyes open, now I can keep them relaxed, and I can withstand that thing, and the tears fall down my cheeks and I don't care. Now I don't have tears anymore. I can just stare at a candle and I don't have any tears at all. I'm just comfortable doing this. So for a while there in Trataka, you will see very physical progress, and it's so fast. It's incredible. The whole eyes burning thing, I tell you, it's about a week. You will very quickly become much better, and then the mobility and so on. So for a while there, you're going to have quite a lot of progress. And on the background, that stuff's going to be happening anyway. So you will have the advantages of meditation on the background as well from Trataka. But you have very visible forms of progress tracking mechanisms that are going to allow you to just stay on track and motivated. Next topic, why you should do Trataka. The advantages of Trataka and the mechanisms through which Trataka works. The first thing you should think about is that Trataka is a physical hold of your eyes. So Trataka is like Pilates for your eyes. If you know anything about Pilates, you know that it is a modality where holds are what gets you strength, right? And indeed, people can get extremely strong with Pilates. They're not going to get hypertrophy, right? So they're not going to get super bulky, but they are going to be very, very strong. And that's through hold. So that holding, it's a very powerful form of exercise. And you're literally just doing that with your eyes. So what's going to happen is that you're going to develop eye strength. We forget it, but our eyes have muscles that control our eye movement and therefore our vision. One way to see how problematic our vision has become is to try to run your eyes diagonally, through the room, and see how your vision is not really continuous. It kind of tracks several points, but it doesn't do a continuous vision from one place to another. Your brain fills up the entire image, but really your eyes don't track the entire image in a continuous way. Well, that's muscle weakness. If you train Trataka, you will start having more elasticity in the eye, in the ability to move around while keeping focus. So That's a great advantage. So it's going to improve eyesight. And in fact, we're going to see that the first time that you see the word Trataka used is as a technique for improving eyesight. The second advantage of Trataka is that it prepares you for more advanced practices. So a lot of advanced practices deal with the Ajna chakra. That's basically the third eye. Those practices are great for improving your intuition. And if you're going on a spiritual path, those practices also have to do with getting inner gurus, hearing the voice of reason, and communicating with things, and a whole lot of very strange things that come out of Ajna chakra practice. But for those of you that are not into all the esoteric stuff, you should know that Ajna chakra practices, or third eye practices, will improve your intuition, and any of us can use that. Well, those practices use heavily keeping the eyes in certain positions. So it's very common for you in those practices to be keeping your eyes looking in that way. So looking at what will be the third eye with your eyes closed. Well, keeping that position is not easy, and especially keeping that position in the way that you are required for advanced practice. So you really do have to keep your eyes relaxed, but at the same time, really quite still in what is a hard position. And so Trataka is sort of like a stepping stone for that. So that's a great thing. Another advantage of Trataka is that it creates a physiological state of flow. So basically, it simulates a flow state in your body, and therefore makes it a lot easier to enter a flow state with your mind. I think that's amazing, and is actually not talked about, but let's analyze it carefully. The first thing is to notice that Trataka stops you from blinking. And so let's think about, why do we blink and what is stopping the blinking doing? Everybody knows that blinking lubricates the eyes, but blinking also plays important neurological roles, and a very important role is in the regulation of attention. So what blinking does is that it allows you to renew attention, or sometimes switch attention. So it's all about, I am doing something, boom, I'm going to something else, or I am going to kind of start anew. So for example, people blink whenever they switch a paragraph. So let's say you're reading a book, when you're changing paragraphs, then you tend to blink. You may not notice it, but actually that's been scientifically shown that people tend to do that. So while you're keeping an idea in your head, while you're trying to process a single thing without switching, you tend to not blink. And in fact, people in flow state tend to not blink at all. They tend to blink very little. So when you have extreme attention to something, you tend to not blink. Well, what is Trataka doing? Trataka is forcing you to stay on that non-blinking state. So it does two things. One of them is that it trains you to stay with your attention in one thing. So yay for attention training, which is kind of what we expect from a meditation technique. But it does something else too, which is it physiologically makes you simulate your eye state when you are in a flow state, which means unblinking. So you basically keep your eyes in the same situation in which they would be if you had been in flow. So great. But what happens when your attention wants to drift? Then you get your second reaction, which is, instead of blinking a lot and kind of switching your attention elsewhere, you're going to go to the second degree, which is what? Which is to drift. So your attention starts drifting, and what happens? Your eyes glaze over, you stop seeing sharply. But what do you do with Trataka? You have to keep your eyes in focus. So when your eyes are in focus, you are not drifting into that distracted state. You see what happens here? To be distracted, you would either be blinking to switch your attention, or your eyes will be glazing over and drifting. Your vision will start blurring so that your attention kind of rests. But Trataka doesn't let you do either of those. So you cannot switch with the blinking. You cannot drift because you're keeping your vision in focus. So you see, physiologically, you are in a state of full attention. So without actually having to tell your brain, hey, pay attention, you are telling your physiology, be in a state of attention. No wonder then you're going to find it easier to actually keep your attention. And so you're going to do two things. Number one, you're going to train your attention to stay in one place. So great for all the benefits of meditation. But also you are creating physiologically a state that resembles flow, which if your mind then gets convinced, oh, I guess we are in flow now, let us act as someone in flow, you might just be feeling amazing while you're meditating, and just keep at the meditation and be able to progress and do all the good things that happen when you start enjoying and feeling like you flow with an activity. So Amazing stuff. Another thing to talk about is that Trataka, when you start really not moving, when you not move your head, when you don't move anything, not just the eyeball, but not the head, so the image stays perfectly still in front of you, then you're going to start to exhaust the photoreceptors. You have neurons in your eyes that are going to receive information from the image. So we're going to receive photons, and then they're going to start a chain reaction of neurons and many other cells that are going to take all this information to the brain, which is going to finally, after a very complicated process, generate images in your brain, which are what you see. Well, that is a very expensive process. It really requires enormous amounts of brain capacity, and the body tends to economize whatever it can. And so once you have been seeing an image nonstop and it does not change, the brain at some point is going to be like, well, I guess I don't need to keep seeing that. And so it's going to stop sending that signal at all. What's going to happen is that the color will start to fade, and the peripheral vision is going to start to fade, and then little by little the entire image starts to fade. So at some point you end up not seeing anything at all, and that is amazing. Okay, you want that. This is actually great for several reasons. The first reason you want that is because vision takes up enormous amounts of brain resources. So when you are no longer seeing, 30 to 50% of your brain's capacity and 20 to 30% of your brain's energy are going to be saved. And that's a lot of resources that now get to be used by the prefrontal cortex to help you keep your attention. So you have all of these mechanisms to keep your attention in place, yay for those of us with ADHD and all the attention deficits. But on top of it, you now have extra resources to also use for attention. So that's what helps the prefrontal cortex, which consumes most energy in your brain, keep your thoughts at bay. Because most thoughts that people have are actually not really had. The prefrontal cortex has filtered them out earlier, subconsciously. And so you want the prefrontal cortex doing that job, and now it has a lot more capacity and a lot more energy to do it. Wonderful. But then you might be thinking, okay, if seeing takes all that energy, why then am I meditating in a seeing position? Why don't I just close my eyes, as in most meditation practices, right? Most meditation practices, you will be closing your eyes. Why am I not doing that? Now those techniques seem a lot more attractive. You will not be doing that because actually not seeing while having your eyes open is unbelievably great from a meditation perspective. Here's what happens. When your eyes are open, your entire being thinks it should see. But when you do not see, then what happens is a state of cognitive dissonance. And it's not just any type of cognitive dissonance. It is a fundamental cognitive dissonance in the duality of the observer and the observed. Now think about it. When you have your eyes open, your brain thinks it should see. So it thinks there should be something that should be observed. But you do not observe anything. So what is going on? There you are as the observer. There should be the observed. There is no observed. Therefore, what is the observer? There cannot be an observer if there is no observed. And so this generates a state of cognitive dissonance, of a paradox. And those of you that know anything about advanced meditation, you know that they love paradoxes, the classic koans, for example. But instead of it being a standard paradox where you're grappling with paradoxical ideas, you're grappling with a paradox in the fundamental sense of duality, right? That for there to be someone who observes, which is a self, there should also be something that is observed and that is fundamentally destroyed. So it's a great esoteric practice. It's hard to describe the essence of how this works, but let me say that progressing into Trataka, into the states of which you cannot see, which is hard, it requires much more than 5 minutes, and it requires perfect immobility, but progressing into those states, it's really advanced practice. It has all the advantages of paradoxes, which are many, and we could discuss in another video. If you're interested, shoot me a note there, a comment. But it's beyond that. It is the mother of all paradoxes when you are fundamentally making the observer observed paradoxical in itself. It's pretty cool stuff. Okay, another thing that Trataka does is that it makes it a lot easier to reach the Dhyana state. Now, if you don't know anything about the Dhyana state, you should check my video that's linked on the screen about that state. That is a state of consciousness that you really want to reach when you're doing meditative practices. So that's the state of consciousness where all the cool stuff happens. So not only do you process much faster, you're going to have spiritual gains much faster, fun stuff happens, right? Meditation becomes really fun. It's just the place where you want to be. And most meditation practices are really trying to get you there. So they try to get you to Dhyana so that from Dhyana you then can explore and then eventually reach Samadhi states, which are basically states of enlightenment. Well, the idea is, if you think about the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, they teach you that to reach the Dhyana state, you will do a whole lot of practices, but most importantly, you will do the meditative practices of Pratyahara and Dharana. Pratyahara are practices that are going to eliminate the senses, and then Dharana are practices that are going to focus your mind. So when you combine the two things, the elimination of senses, while you're focusing your mind, then your body naturally will then reach the Dhyana state. You cannot do the Dhyana state, you can only get the conditions so that you can reach that state. Well, if you are doing Trataka, you're doing both at the same time. First, Trataka will chase away every sensation, every thought, everything. So Trataka will make you focus by all of the mechanisms that we discussed before on a single thing, and that thing will be some form of physical sensation or some effort to keep your eyes still, while fundamentally chasing away everything else, because it overloads you so much. That sensation is so strong that it drives away thought, and it also drives away other sensations. So you're not going to be worrying about other pains and other things like that when you're worrying about that one thing. All your attention consumed with one thing, you may end up in Dhyana. So it is a great practice to do that. I have reached Dhyana through Trataka. My favorite is actually not Trataka, is Kayashtiram, which we can discuss in another video, but it is wonderful. It works extremely well, and I highly recommend it for that. Okay, and the last advantage of Trataka that I want to discuss today is the ability to go into Trataka Yantra. So when you reach 5 minutes of Trataka perfection level, then you have a choice. So you can go into deeper forms of Trataka, basically just stare longer and see if that image disappears, work with that stuff that we were just discussing. But you can also go into inner Trataka. Now, I'm not going to discuss inner Trataka in this video because this is going to get way too long as it is. Let me know in the comments if you want me to go into inner Trataka in another video. But inner Trataka is the practice of closing your eyes then and then looking at the negative image of what you were staring at. So let's say you have a candle, and that's why a candle is really cool, because it makes inner Trataka substantially easier. Then when you close your eyes, you see the negative image of the candle, which is going to be kind of like imprinted in your field of vision as you have your eyes closed. And then you look at that, and then you practice with that. You practice keeping it exactly in the same place, and you practice relaxing. This is tons of stuff to talk about inner Trataka. Inner Trataka is an unbelievable practice for Ajna chakra, so crazy practice for third eye. Unbelievable practice for spiritual things. You can combine it with yantras, you can combine it with sacred geometry and kind of get 2 for 1. It's truly spectacular stuff. It's fun stuff. Most people love it. Most people think it's a lot of fun. And you access it through Trataka. You have to have done Trataka for a fair amount of time to then be able to close your eyes and boom, work with that inner Trataka. There are ways to work with inner Trataka that are very dangerous, very fast. You don't want to do those. But overall, you're going to do slow Trataka, standard Trataka, and then you go close your eyes, and then you're going to do that practice. You need Trataka to access that, and it's an amazing practice. By the way, it's my favorite. Most of the time when I do Trataka, I'm doing inner Trataka, not so much the other one. So that's the way I use it the most. So not too shabby, right? It's an amazing, amazing technique, which I really hope you give it a chance. And when you hear all of these advantages, you might be wondering, well, why isn't Trataka more well-known? Why isn't everybody teaching Trataka? Why isn't Trataka like a basic technique that everyone should know? And there are reasons for that. The first thing to understand is that the majority of techniques that are right now in the West, the most famous things that are taught, the things that you're going to find in meditation apps, and the things that have been used in the protocols for medical research into mindfulness and all these other practices that are used in psychology and so on, are mostly coming from very few traditions. They're mostly coming from Theravada Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, and recently you see a lot more of Dzogchen as well. But it's really not from a lot of traditions, and specifically not from where Trataka comes from. Trataka, as we'll talk, mostly comes from Tantra. And so, first of all, different tradition. Now, the second reason is because Trataka is not that easy to explain how to do well, right? It took me a minute to tell you how to do it. It took me all this time to explain it to you in detail. So Trataka properly said takes a little bit more. And if you want to do protocols, if you want to do medical research, if you want to teach a whole bunch of people through an app and so on, those techniques that are much, much simpler to explain will become a lot more attractive. And so that's part of the reason. You also can do it for 20 minutes, and most people are not going to have crazy reactions to 20 minutes, right? If I tell you, hey, breathe and for 20 minutes, pay attention to your breath, you may not enjoy it. You might think it's boring, but you're not going to run away. It's not going to seem crazy to you. Whereas Trataka could seem crazy. A lot of people are going to be very turned off. It's very extreme in a very real sense, right? And many people are going to experiment with it. And without having been told how it progresses, they're going to freak out. Like at the moment you're like, seeing your eyes well up and feeling that burn, you're going to feel, I'm damaging my eyes, something wrong is happening, and so you're going to run away, and that's not great. Nobody's going to be running away from 20 minutes of paying attention to the breath. So you see how this ends up happening. So if you are someone that stood with me up to this time in this video, you care about meditation, you want to learn, so you're already an insider. But how do you bring the outsiders in? How to do it with Trataka, we have to admit, is really not a beginner technique at the essence. There's something we need to discuss here, and that is the fact that one of the reasons why those techniques get taught so much is because they're safe. 20 minutes of paying attention to your breath for the rest of your life is not going to have any risk. Now, of course, it could have some risk. Some people have pre-existing conditions, right? So they can have schizophrenia tendencies and things like that. And meditation might cause trouble. But it's truly overwhelmingly safe. The majority of people practicing like that will not encounter any big issues. Now, that is not true of advanced techniques. So the more advanced the technique, the more risk they carry. But why? Why is it that Trataka, for example, is going to be more dangerous than paying attention to the breath? Because Trataka is more effective than paying attention to the breath. So the reason those techniques are so safe is because they're ineffective. They progress you extremely slowly. The people that progress using those techniques, your Zen Buddhist, they're going to go on to doing a lot of hours of that. So you need a lot of hours, very extreme practices in the volume and time and the timelines they're dealing with is several lifetimes and things like that. So when you go into things like Tantra and, much, much faster progress type of traditions, stuff gets way more dangerous. That's the way this is. And the reality is advanced meditation is not safe in the same way that advanced exercise is not safe. You're gonna do advanced gymnastics, you can get hurt. You can die doing advanced gymnastics, right? You can get very hurt with advanced exercise. Same thing with meditation. You could get very hurt. Now, there are degrees of that, and most people are going to encounter a problem here and there in their progress, and then they're going to overcome it and be the stronger for it. That's the most likely path, and the decision is yours, and you should be responsible about what you're doing. And I'm going to do what everybody else does, which is to say, search for a teacher. Good luck finding a teacher, you Western person. I find it hard. I think it's very hard to get good teachers. Everyone that tells you to find a teacher also tells you that, hey, the potential for abuse is very high. I don't know how you solve that one. I don't know. I don't have the answer for that. What I know is that you have to have some responsibility to watch yourself and see how you operate around these things. I don't think 20 minutes of Trataka is particularly risky. There are some things that could be dangerous perhaps at 20 minutes, perhaps some Kundalini practices, but most practices at 20 minutes are not going to present any particular risk. Should you stop it at 20 minutes because I said that there might be risk beyond that? Look, you're a grown-up. Decide. I've done Trataka for substantially longer than 20 minutes. A lot of people do that, and there are risks. There's also wonderful stuff on the other side. But that explains also why it's not more well-known all around. Trataka is pretty esoteric. It comes from pretty esoteric traditions, and it is pretty esoteric in nature. It is strange, right? It is very weird. It is often practiced together with things like yantras, deities, and things like that. And it's pretty esoteric, so that explains a lot. All right, moving on. where does Trataka come from? So what's the context? Trataka comes from tantric traditions, especially Kashmiri Shaivism, over 1,000 years ago. Now, it was not called Trataka, but the texts of those traditions have plenty of references to practices where you stare at something without blinking. So that is something that existed. Now, the word Trataka, though, that means steady gaze. So the word Trataka is precisely look without moving. That word was first used in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. That is the main text of Hatha Yoga. Now, you know anything about Hatha Yoga? Hatha Yoga is the mother of all the traditions of yoga that exist in the West. So when we think Hatha Yoga, we think movement, right? We think asana. We think the poses. Well, what Hatha Yoga actually is a whole set of practices and knowledge around reaching enlightenment. So it's not just about the movement, the holding the poses. What it is a way to make the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali doable. So the idea being that Patanjali set up the 8 limbs of yoga that would make it possible for you to reach enlightenment by just going through those practices. So that's known as the Raja path. That's the path of willpower. If I have the willpower to do the things that Patanjali told us, then eventually I will reach enlightenment. So I will do all of these things. I will do asana, I will do pratyahara, pranayama, and I will reach enlightenment. Well, it turns out that it is actually very hard because Patanjali is not exactly specific about how you should go about doing a lot of these steps. Well, what Hatha Yoga does is that it's specifying very explicitly what you should do with each one of those steps. Well, in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the first limb is all about the purification of the body. What you are doing is that you're cleansing yourself and purifying yourself for the practice. Fundamentally, the most important piece there seems to be the purification of the senses. So you're making sure that all your senses, I'm talking smell, taste, touch, hearing, and seeing, are as pure as possible. And so to do that, of course, you bathe and you brush your teeth and things like that you will think are more standard, but there are also a lot of non-standard practices. Well, those practices, all the cleansing practices are called in the Hatha Yoga. Remember, Hatha Yoga is going to be way more specific. So in Hatha Yoga, those practices are called Shaktarmas. And Trataka is basically the 6th Shaktarma. If you're curious about the previous Shaktarmas, they have to do with digestive and nasal areas. So basically you're going to have neti, which is the neti pot, right, where you clear your sinuses. You're going to have vomiting. You're going to clean the mouth, basically brush your teeth and scrape your tongue. You're going to have abdominal churning, which is a movement that kind of looks like a belly dancer. You know how they do? Enemas. It can get very, very weird. There are all types of crazy practices. Some are more standard, some are more well-known in the West. Some are really crazy, swallow pieces of cloth, and there's all types of things in those Shaktarmas. Now, the 5th Shaktarma is very interesting. That's Kapalabhati, or also known as Kapalbhati. So Kapalabhati is a form of breathing, is a pranayama, where you breathe by pushing below the belly in, and you do to forcefully push the air out. That's all about the purification of your skull. It's known as skull shining breath. Basically, purification of the skull is basically clearing energy channels and things like that. And then comes the last one of them. So the last Shaktarma is Trataka. So what is Trataka about? Trataka in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika is presented as a technique for purification of the eyes. The idea being that by doing this, you will train your eyes, you're going to improve your muscle function, you're going to make your vision a lot clearer, you're going to refresh the eyes with the crying, that's going to force crying, and that crying is going to make all of the channels for the tears be cleansed and so on. Not only are you forcing those channels to release liquid, but then you have the liquid itself purifying your eyes. Then you have the physical practice in the eyes. So it's all about eye. But Hatha Yoga, they know what they're doing here. They know what they're doing. Because by the end of all of this, imagine what is someone that has taken all these measures and then they do Kapalabhati. So you're doing this breathing. If you ever done Kapalabhati, you know that when you end Kapalabhati, you're in some state. I mean, it does make you feel a certain way. So it already puts you in a place. Then you go on and you do Trataka. Boom, you throw on top of it a highly focusing technique. That means that very much in line with Hatha Yoga style, remember that Hatha Yoga considers asana a high meditative technique. So normally when you think about Patanjali, he will will consider asana as a preparatory technique. So the idea being, you're preparing to meditate. I prepare my body to meditate. Then I do pranayama, I prepare my energy. Then finally I meditate. That will be Pratyahara and Dharana. Those are going to be finally meditating. All of the stuff is before, but not Hatha Yoga. Remember, Hatha Yoga considers the asana already high-level meditation. By the time you get to asana, you've already done Kapalbhati and Trataka, which means you get to asana already kind of like in another state. So when you do your asanas, when you do the Hatha Yoga asanas, then you're already reaching other states of consciousness so that you might be able to perhaps reach advanced states of consciousness without even going to Dharana, even going to Pratyahara. You're going to make your asana itself be already the focusing technique and the sensory elimination technique. It's really powerful stuff. It's really interesting. And for those of you that are very advanced, you may consider using Trataka as a preparatory technique before even doing asana, or perhaps even before doing other meditation techniques, and see how that brings up your practice. So for that, you will do a very quick Trataka. They're talking 5 minutes Trataka, and then throw yourself into other practices and see how that goes. I think it's actually really impressive how Trataka can boost asana practice and make you practice the asanas already in this kind of altered state of consciousness, which is really cool. All right, and then we reach our final part, which is when you should stop doing Trataka. You don't have to, you can do Trataka forever, but I have a couple of things to say. The first one is that you have to be careful with overdoing Trataka in the beginning, because Trataka is a physical practice. And with every physical practice, too much of it will result in pain and will result in problems. What if I told you, hey, you start doing push-ups, now go there and do 100 push-ups the first day, the next day you're gonna be very hurt. So it's the same thing. This is an eye practice that requires progression. So we start with 1 minute. Do take this seriously. Start low, because this is not just a practice of being able to withstand. You're exercising a muscle that could be overly exhausted. So be responsible about the stuff and pace yourself, because this is a physical practice. Overall, you don't have to stop doing it, but you can. I mean, you can use, and I have used Trataka as a stepping stone into other practices. I think it's amazing in the path to not obsess over just keeping the same practice forever and ever and ever. I think sometimes there is this attitude that you pick something and then you do it forever and then it's going to work. I find that going with my intuition and switching the practices and searching around and going into what's calling me has been a lot more fruitful and a lot more fun. And I did Trataka for a long time, and then I stopped doing Trataka, and then I do other things, and then sometimes I'll come back to it, and then sometimes I just won't do it for a while. And I think it's also perfectly fine. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. And then if you did, of course, remember to like, subscribe, and share it with other people. Also comment. It makes my day when you comment. It makes me feel like I'm not speaking to the void, which is what this feels like. It's rather hard to talk to a camera, and it's wonderful to see that I have other human beings around that are actually listening. So leave me a comment. Any comment just makes me so happy. So thank you very much, and I wish you all the best in this path. I really mean it. I hope to see you in my next video.